This is the second week of our sermon series, Lightening the Load. Our journey together through this Lenten season is a movement of self-discovery and communal growth. Much of the Christian church celebrates Lent in quiet and humble ways, leading up to a more triumphant celebration of Easter. This season allows for periods of contemplation, and so it is with this in mind that we are invited into a process of self-reflection. This box of baggage that we've been carrying around with us each week, and that we all carry around with us all of the time, may not be something that we're proud of, but it's also not something to feel shameful about or disappointed in not being able to completely empty it. It is something that we can look into, consider how we might clean out some of the junk, and assess the consequences of what comes from carrying around things that do not offer any benefit to ourselves and one another. And as we journey through Lent, there may be some topics that resonate more deeply for ourselves or for others. But if we find that we are only ever considering the baggage in the boxes of others, then we are likely avoiding or missing out on a real opportunity for personal growth ourselves. This morning, we talk about relationships, something that we all have experience with and can certainly find some ways to improve upon. Relationships come in all different forms. There's common civic relationships with neighbors or acquaintances in our community. Also, relationships with work. Some are occasional, some are intense. Indeed, some people may even spend more waking hours in conversations with their colleagues than family members or spouses. There are also relationships in a faith community like this one, with some people who have known each other for a lifetime and others not known very well at all. There are social relationships among friends, relationships among close and distant family members, and of course, romantic relationships between partners and spouses. And as you consider this intricate web of relationships in your own life, you recognize that some of these are chosen relationships, some are long-term, some are deep, some are healthy, but others might be out of convenience or necessity, or perhaps fleeting or shallow, and some may be downright painful and even unhealthy. Relationships can be complicated, and not in some first time falling in love and misunderstanding each other kind of way, but in very real, rational, complex ways. Different relationships require different kinds of interactions. But as followers of Jesus, we know that all healthy, lasting relationships require love. In some moments, that may require affection or comfort. Other times, it may require patience or silence. Relationships often demand self-sacrifice, but other times, love means that we have to be firm and create boundaries in order to provide support or encouragement. Knowing the right and loving thing to do in every single situation and every relationship is an impossibility. We are flawed, and broken relationships reflect that. So we must make sure that we take time to assess our own role in the relationships that we have. None of us maintain perfect relationships with all people. We're all susceptible to self-interest, capable of manipulation, and unable to universally anticipate the exact needs and desires of others. But there are certain habits and traits that commonly lead to broken and toxic relationships with others. We're often pretty skilled at naming those characteristics in other people. But how readily do we identify them in ourselves? Sometimes we are blissfully unaware or unwilling to acknowledge our own faults. For example, if you believe that a majority of your relationships are unhealthy or problematic, that is an important first step. But the next step may include identifying what your role and culpability is in difficult relationships. Scripture informs us about what some of these traits might be when it tells us what love is and, importantly, what it is not. In 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 to 6, we see, "Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth." And the Message says it this way: love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut, doesn't have a swelled head, doesn't force itself on others, isn't always me first, doesn't fly off the handle, doesn't keep score of the sins of others, doesn't revel when others grovel. There are toxic and harmful personality traits like this. And there are other ones: being overly judgmental of others, refusing to apologize, acting in manipulative ways, not taking responsibility for feelings or actions, always playing the victim, not listening to the needs of others, dishonesty, lying, negativity, being quick to anger, arrogance, greed, rudeness. It's unlikely to identify with every single one of these things on the list, but do we ever carry around any of these traits in our own box? I know I do. Love does not always manifest itself in the same way for every relationship. And love does not mean endlessly sacrificing oneself to abuse or toxicity. There are times when it is necessary to separate ourselves from harmful and destructive relationships. Sometimes this may not only be the best thing for our own well-being, but also for the other person too. Certain relationships may bring out the worst versions of ourselves, and creating that separation may be good for everyone involved. As followers of Jesus, we are called to love one another, but loving others does not require self-sabotage or destruction. But it also does not allow for us to retaliate with toxic behaviors of our own. Much better to create distance or healthy boundaries. When Jesus offers instructions to his disciples, he tells them in this verse, Matthew 10, these are instructions that he gives to his disciples as they're going out. He says, "Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest upon it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet." Admittedly, though, depending on the relationship, this may not be so simple. We do not always have easy ways of creating space from coworkers or neighbors or family members. But the good news is that most of our relationships are indeed salvageable and manageable with intentional work of developing strategies to improve them. Still, some people are just simply not compatible. And a reminder that loving someone does not mean that we have to like everything about them. We don't need to numb ourselves from feeling the human emotions of frustration, disappointment, or anger. But we also cannot allow those emotions to control our responses by acting out in retaliation. Developing healthy communication strategies is essential to all relationships. Sometimes, in an effort to try and avoid conflict, we avoid communication entirely. And other times, we communicate in unhealthy ways. There is always space to do a better job in communicating, not just in how we talk, but also in how we listen. This reminds me of a story of one time when I was working at camp over the summer as a counselor. Every week, the counselors are required to clean up the cabin, to pick up some of the trash that's laying around that's inevitably left behind, to clean up some lost and found, to sweep off the porch, to empty the trash, to just give a little bit of a cleanup to the cabin before the next week starts. And unlike today, there was far less time in between camps, so it was often a crunch to get that done. And whether I completely forgot to do it or didn't do a very good job of it, I didn't leave the cabin in a great position for the next counselor to come in. And so one of the counselors came up to me and said, "Jason, you were in Boys 2 last week, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, I want you to know that I just spent the last 20 minutes picking up trash, cleaning up lost and found, sweeping off the porch, and emptying things that you were supposed to do. And that means that I didn't get to enjoy the time that I had planned on. So I just want you to know that it was very disrespectful for you to do that, and I did not appreciate having to do that myself." And I was kind of shocked. And the shock that I had was basically at the bluntness of the conversation that took place. But despite initially kind of being taken aback and feeling a little upset about being spoken to that frankly, I realized that he was right. And in reality, I gained a lot of respect for him, stating his feelings so clearly and being so upfront with me. He didn't beat around the bush. He didn't go and talk to the other counselors about how I left the cabin dirty and start a rumor campaign about me. He came to me directly. And this is exactly how Scripture encourages us to handle conflict when we feel wronged by someone. Matthew 18 invites us to go directly to the individual and share our concerns. That's the first step. It doesn't have to be an ambush or an attack. It can even be vulnerable, but it ought to be honest. Many times that kind of confrontation can be intimidating, but it often helps to clearly communicate the issues that exist. We are all different, and so learning more about another person may be an important part of connecting with them. But for all of our relationships, it is also essential that we understand ourselves more deeply too. One of the things that has been most helpful for me in relating to others has been learning more about my own personality and my tendencies. There are numerous ways that we can gain deeper understanding about ourselves. One way is to listen to trusted voices around us. If all of the closest people in our lives have pointed out similar things over and over again, there is likely some value in listening to what they're saying. Another option could be as simple as taking some kind of personality assessment. There are a surprising number of these tests that exist out there: the Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, DISC profiles. You can go online, and there were so many of them. Most of them I'd never heard of. But if that's something you're interested in, they're certainly out there and available. Personally, I know that I have learned a lot about myself and how to relate to others through the framework of one of these tests called the Enneagram. Also, counseling or therapy is another great way to gain deeper insight and develop strategies for relating to others. There are professionals who have resources available to help in any number of situations, both for self-improvement and in how to handle interactions with difficult relationships. There are indeed many things in this world that we do not have control over, including the actions of others, as nice as that might be. But there are things in our own lives that we can control. For some, exercises in mindfulness and meditation may provide opportunities for self-care. Prayer is certainly an excellent way to unburden ourselves from added stress, and also an important part of strengthening our relationship and our connection with God. Contemplative prayer or silence allows us to focus our attention on how God is calling us and moving within the world around us. One spiritual exercise that I have found helpful in my own life in assessing my interactions with others is to remember or examine my day at the end of each night when I fall asleep. For those who worry about not having enough time set aside for meditative or spiritual practices, this is something that can be done in just a few minutes when laying down to fall asleep, something I think most of us do every night. The formal approach to this practice involves a few steps, but for me, I simply try to remember as many different interactions or situations I encountered during the day. It could be with family members, strangers, co-workers, friends, and I consider where I saw Christ-like love in those interactions. Where did I fall short? Where did those encounters go well, and where were they difficult? Not looking to arrive at any profound revelations about the day, I rarely do that, but in considering how I have interacted and related to other people, I examine my own role in relationships. Intentionality and processing can be incredibly valuable and beneficial for better understanding ourselves and how we relate to others. Given this introspective sermon series during this Lenten season, we are providing opportunities for this kind of experience here in the sanctuary on Wednesday nights. These services last around 30 minutes, and we hope to offer a spiritual breath of fresh air in the midst of our hurried lives. Prayers, readings, and simple music can provide comfort and guidance. I would encourage you to consider joining us in person here in the sanctuary or online via the live stream every Wednesday throughout Lent at 6:30. Through this process of looking inward, we are constantly reminded that we are intimately connected to one another. Relationships may often be a source of frustration and difficulty, but the support and mutual aid we experience from friends and family are most often the source of our greatest joys and strength. This is why we are called to love one another, not merely to curtail the frequency and severity of harm that we're capable of doing, but to encourage us to be there to comfort, support, and be present for one another. When we truly act in love, even frustrations and burdens can become bearable. It's how parents accomplish seemingly impossible feats for endless needs of their children. It's how spouses perform their least favorite chores just to bring joy to their partners. It's why people go out of their way to deliver meals, or donate anonymously, or volunteer repeatedly, and it's why recipients of these things are so grateful. When we understand and put to action with intentionality, healthy loving is the secret sauce to all relationships. Every Lenten season culminates with a triumphant celebration of Easter. But in the Holy Week before, the Church of the Brethren traditionally celebrates a love feast meal. This is a holy event for the gathered church to come together for an examination, a simple meal, communion, and feet washing. And for the past 2 years, this congregational body has not met together in person for any shared meal. And hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, pending health and safety guidance and regulations, I'm hopeful that we will have a love feast together in person. Finally, gathering together in a few weeks will be a noteworthy event, and especially meaningful for it to be a love feast meal together. An important part of preparation for love feast involves seeking to be in right relationship with one another. In our not-too-distant past, deacons would visit every member in advance of Love Feast to ensure that there was no hostility or malice between members. This may not have meant solving all problems or disagreements, but being able to find Christian love for one another before engaging in Love Feast together. Seeking to be in right relationship with others inside and outside the church is not something that needs to be prompted. There's a fly. I caught him. Got him. Seeking to be in right relationship with others inside and outside of the church is not something that needs to be prompted by a love feast meal. We are called to love, and if we seek to impact the larger systemic conversations swirling around us, we must first make sure we examine our own hearts and minds with the relationships that are closest to us. May we all seek to follow in the way of Jesus, with the vulnerability, the patience, humility, forgiveness, and self-reflection needed to strengthen the relationships we have to one another within the world around us.